I'm going to be talking about something which is very exciting and offbeat path. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you to our session on entrepreneurship. We have a very great set of speakers to talk about this off-beaten path. But before we start, let me start off with a short quiz. What do you think is common here? These are products we use in our day-to-day life. There's Gmail from Google, there's the Facebook Live button, and there's Post-it notes. So please go ahead and share your thoughts in the chat session, and I'll look at them. Hopefully that gets your juices running as to what do you think is common between all of these day-to-day products. Great, thanks for your comments. Yeah, so some of you got this correct, right? All of these products were built by employees within an established organization without any mandate from the top. As you know, Gmail was formulated and conceived during the 20% time that Google allocates to its employees. Likewise, Facebook Live was conceived during one of the hackathons, and 3M Post-it notes was also an outcome of internal innovation. So as you can see, all of these products have been impactful and have made a huge impact for everyone in this world. And this is an outcome of what we call as entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is actually a very relatively new term. It came into being, or it came more into common vernacular around the mid-1980s. So it's been around only for about 4 decades. Entrepreneurship, as you can imagine, is the act of behaving like an entrepreneur. But the key difference is it is while you're working within an established organization. So the motives and the rewards are similar, but it is within an organization. If you look at it from a firm's point of view, it is the practice of corporate management style that integrates risk-taking with innovation approaches. And it also uses the similar reward and motivational techniques. So what leads us to focus on entrepreneurship as a topic during this IIT2020 event? One of the common themes about IIT 2020 is how we as individuals can make an impact because of where we are in the future. So ultimately, all entrepreneurs are in it for one important reason, just like entrepreneurs. They want to improve the world and drive progress, right? And so our hope as we put together this panel is, as you hear their stories, you will think about how we can enable employees to become more entrepreneurial global citizens within established corporations and help solve the biggest problems affecting humanity. That is the goal of putting together this globally diverse panel. And we hope that by looking and hearing all the speakers, you get a very diverse perspective as to how other people have worked through these problems within companies and what are the challenges as you also look to make positive impact using your corporation's resources. Without further delay, let me introduce the speakers who will go and share their best practices and their success stories. So first of all, it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya from India. I know it's a difficult time zone for Jaijit, so I really appreciate him joining us. So Dr. Jaijit is an expert on technology policy and in technology-driven government and societal transformation. He is the president of Center of Digital Economic Policy Research and founder of Zero on Microsystems, a fintech firm. He is the former head of Center of Fourth Industrial Revolution India, World Economic Forum, and former head and partner of Economic and Policy Practice, KPMG. He was also a recipient of APJ Abdul Kalam Award for Innovation in Governance. Bhattacharya is an adjunct professor at Department of Management Studies, IIT, and he is also a member of the Governing Society of IIT Raipur. He received his PhD from Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Delhi, MBA from IIM Cal, and BTech in Electrical Engineering from IIT Kanpur. Dr. Jaijit will be followed by Dr. Herman Schmit. Herman Schmit has seen innovation from very different perspectives. As a faculty member in Carnegie Mellon from 96 to 2004, as an early member of 3 startup companies, Silicon Mobius, Tabula, and eASIC, as well as established Silicon Valley companies like Intel and Google. At Altera, he was the chief architect for 3 generations of FPGAs. And at Google, he develops new machine learning accelerator architectures. He is the author of over 40 papers and inventor or co-inventor of 139 patents. This will be followed up with Julia Samoylenko. Julia has been with medtech giant Medtronic for 8 years and is currently a senior manager there on strategic transformation for enterprise business services. She is a results-focused, influential leader with extensive global experience driving strategic direction and launching transformative innovation programs. She earned multiple highly recognized corporate awards, including Medtronic CIO Award, Medtronic Star of Excellence, and CIO Partner Excellence. Julia is also an alumni of Stanford Lead Innovation Progress. She is passionate about frontier technology, science, and innovation, and is determined to mentor and empower women to become successful executives. She will be talking about how she helped set up some startups within her organization. Finally, I have Dr. Sumit Gupta, who is the VP of AI Strategy and CTO for IBM Data and AI Business Unit. He is leading a new initiative to build out an IBM-wide strategy on AI. Till recently, Sumit was VP of Products for AI, Machine Learning, and HPC in IBM Cognitive Systems Business Unit. He said, prior to IBM, Sumit was the general manager of AI and GPU accelerated data center business at NVIDIA and was central in building that business from ground up to what is now a multi-billion-dollar business at NVIDIA. So this is very relevant to some of the topics that we will discuss in this panel. Sumit has a PhD in CS from UC Irvine and a bachelor from IIT Delhi in Doubly. So I'm super excited to hear what all these speakers will share with us and how we can learn from them to set ourselves along an entrepreneurship path as well. With that, let me welcome Dr. Jaijit Bhattacharya to talk about his stories.
Thank you, Rohit. Thanks for the wonderful introduction, and that's quite embarrassing. And I hope people do get a diverse views of what we have to say and not a confusing set of views. So I have a little deck and a presentation which I'll like to share, and I'll just go ahead and share my screen. I hope you can see my screen in a slide share mode.
Yes.
Okay, so great. I'll be talking about entrepreneurship from an Indian perspective. And let me start off by actually talking about a little differentiator in terms of entrepreneurship, where one, in my view, entrepreneur is where the company is the incubator, and sometimes the company is also the VC, and that's how they become the entrepreneur. And then that leads to either new businesses getting created within the company, or it leads to new businesses getting created outside of the company. And that's normally what the outcome of an entrepreneur venture is. And if you look at from an Indian perspective, I just put three poster boys out there of entrepreneurial ventures. If you look at Tata's, they are a salt to steel behemoth. And why do we have so many of Indian conglomerates having entrepreneurship and having so many range of products out there and of business interests? And that's basically because they're operating in a high risk environment. And therefore, entrepreneurial venture comes quite naturally, because if you are focused on one single venture and in a high risk ecosystem, if that venture does not succeed, the entire group goes down. And therefore, from an Indian perspective, which is a traditionally higher risk environment, you will see that there are a large set of conglomerates getting into entrepreneurial ventures, which then leads to more value coming out. Tatas were obviously famous for coming out with a 1 lakh rupee car, but they also came out with one of the most valuable IT companies globally, which was TCS. In fact, 1968, it was more of an internal department. And then as part of the entrepreneurial venture, FC Kohli went ahead and created a new company out of that little department. And in fact, I was lucky to have FC Kohli actually write the foreword of one of my books. But that was a venture of Tata's. But if you go to Wipro's, they started off as a vegetable oil company seller. And from there, they have spun off as a venture which is into lighting, a venture which is into digital, into IT, and so on and so forth. And that brings me to Reliance, where they have actually very recently come out with the world's biggest startup in terms of digital and in terms of marketing, of markets, of retail. So a petroleum company started off internal ventures into telecom, and then into digital, and then into retail. And while we were all locked down, they came out with a valuation, a combined valuation of their startups of over $100 billion. And that is the kind of entrepreneurial activity that's going on in India. And it's absolutely fabulous to track what's going on. And these are just some of the few examples out there. There's clearly not everything that's happening. So it's a very exciting journey that we're having in India over here. So going back to some of the basic questions as to why do we have entrepreneurship? One, because there's a business need. The world is changing. If Wipro was still selling vegetable oils, do you think their valuation will be what it is right now? If Wipro stands for vegetable oil producing company. And therefore, you need to see where the world is going, where the markets are. And that's where an entrepreneurial venture does what is typically captured in the Indian societal moves, where we destruct in order to construct. It also acts as a business reconnaissance tool that does a new market segment really make sense, or it doesn't make sense? Can we get a bunch of people within the company to go out and check, build something and test the market and see if there's really a business model, or if there is a technology model to actually serve the business model? So it acts as a good reconnaissance tool. It also has reduced cost of actually doing an entrepreneurial venture. Instead of doing it outside, you do an entrepreneurial venture because the costs are lower. You don't need to pay for an HR separately, for accounting separately, marketing, sales, channels, distribution. The bunch of that cost gets reduced significantly because it is within the organization, which also leads to reduced risk. If you are spending less, then the risks are much lower. And that's what pushing companies to actually promote entrepreneurship. And that also leads to a better chance of survival, because you have the ecosystem in place, you have the connects in place, you've got access to the market. And that also leads to disrupting oneself before the world really disrupts you. Unfortunately, I haven't really seen too many entrepreneurial venture which actually disrupts a parent company, but that should be one of the focus areas. In fact, I have been in initiatives where we were close to disrupting the parent organization's initiative and existing business, and that did not really work out. And those are some of the things I'll cover in the next 5-6 minutes. It also helps in keeping alive the entrepreneurial venture within the entrepreneurial culture in the organization. And as you said, Rohit, earlier, that this is a very old concept. In fact, here is a Time magazine clipping I've put out there of 1985, which clearly shows that entrepreneurship has become very mature by 1985. So what does a traditional Indian entrepreneur look like, or an entrepreneur look like? Well, we used to have the family ventures, the big family businesses where where the uncle, the grandfather, the aunt, the cousin, everybody is doing some business. They were one of the first ones to help out in the entrepreneurial ventures. They became your advisory board. They pushed you to start up something. They pushed you to, they became your incubator. They became your venture funder. They became your market access, because you would end up selling to your cousin or your uncle or your aunt or grandfather or somebody in that big, huge family network. So there is a deep, rich tradition of entrepreneurship where instead of the company, there used to be a family entrepreneurship. And if you're not following what your parents' business is, then you will be pushed into creating a new business depending on what the new market segments are. So there is actually a rich tradition of entrepreneurship in India. And I'm talking from a vantage point of actually rolling out a whole bunch of successful entrepreneurship in multiple companies and in the military, where we actually rolled out a Gaussian knocksock for the military, which could be transported. So I can vouch for the fact that it works in India. But there are also many challenges. I was lucky that most of these are successful because there was a lot of backup from the top management. There's complete support from the top management. But in spite of that, there will be and will always be existing structures which push you back. The organization has been constructed in a particular manner, which is not really conducive of the changes that an entrepreneurial venture will bring in. There are quarterly pressures. You can't just take away a resource from the organization, but the resource is focused on the targets being laid out for that particular quarter, and expect that that resource will be aligned to the kind of entrepreneurial venture that you're doing. There'll be market space conflicts. There'll be budget pressures. And in the interest of time, I'm just not going into the details of it. There'll be conflicts with communication to existing customers. And imagine you go to the existing customer whom you're selling vegetable oil and say, well, I'm now going to do the digital transformation for you. Well, that doesn't really work. There are two different brands out there. And that leads to the structure of the organization also to be changed significantly. You can't have, for example, a partnership company coming in and backing up your entrepreneurial venture, because by the time that starts paying off, some of the partners would have retired. So you cannot have some of the structures of the organization actually prohibits you from getting into entrepreneurial ventures. And those are challenges. And therefore, some of the mantras followed are do nothing and nothing will go wrong within an organization. And that's a pushback that you get, because there are people within the organization who would not like to get into the collateral damage that might happen because of your entrepreneurial venture. And therefore, the trick is to find adjacencies instead of disruptions within an organization to be really successful. Again, there is no one rule, but that's something that I'm just putting out there. There's also deep fear and anger of loss that might happen. If there's a financial loss, there will be others who will be taking the hit for that. If there's a market loss, there is a accountability that is out there, and an organization has been built for accountability. So you suddenly cannot say that, well, I don't really care about financial losses and market losses or reputational losses, because as a startup, you will not have a full product. You will have what is typically called an MVP, a minimum viable product. You can't go out with a minimal viable product and play around with the brand name of an established company. That is anathema. There's reputational loss of the professionals. There's loss of privileges. These professionals will not be allowed to take another bet in the near future. That's the nature of the company. And so there is loss of future opportunities that will be coming in. And that's very challenging. And I'm just taking a quick example of the Kodak moment, where one of the engineers of Kodak, Steve Sasson, went ahead and built the digital camera in 1970. There was fear and anger against what he had built up, because the shareholders had actually paid or actually invested into Kodak to make sure that Kodak is able to sell films based on the cameras that they sell, pretty much like a Gillette model, where you sell the blades because you've sold the razor, or like a HP model where you sell the print cartridges because you've sold the printer. But imagine somebody coming and saying, well, you don't need to sell blades anymore because I'll make a bladeless razor, or you don't need to sell any more ink cartridges because I've made a printer which doesn't need your ink cartridges. that's anathema. That's angering the organization. That's exactly what happened with Kodak. We know what was the outcome of it. I mean, it's a classic poster boy example of how you should not be treating entrepreneurship. And that's just, is well summarized in the saying from Gita, which says, from anger comes delusion, from delusion, the loss of memory, from loss of memory, the destruction of wisdom. And destruction of wisdom leads to perishing, which is exactly what happened in the Kodak situation. And that was the Kodak moment. So entrepreneurship and ignoring of entrepreneurship has a lot of challenges. The other quick point around entrepreneurship is a market permission. You can't play around with a brand. Brand conflict hence needs a different brand. For example, if you're selling vegetable oils, you suddenly can't go and say, now I'll be selling you IT. And therefore, there's a need to protect existing brand. There's need, therefore, to create possibly new brand to support the entrepreneurship, which actually requires more investment. And it might be an issue of ultra-vires in that sense. And I think it could be well summarized in a bit of a parody from the Boyzone song, that brand is all I have to take your market away. And if you mess around with the brand, you actually mess around with the parent company. So it becomes quite a challenge to come out with new such solutions. Now, entrepreneurship is not limited to companies alone. If you look at the Sri Lankan Navy, they were facing the issue of LTT terrorists coming and banging their small boats full of explosives against a large ship. So they had to figure out one way of solving it. And they formed a small entrepreneurial team which came out with a solution that, well, we'll not use the big ships. We'll also use the small ships. And they end up having 20, 30 small ships being around, or small boats being around, which solved the problem of not being rammed by the LTT terrorist boats. And those were entrepreneurial ventures within the military. Similarly, there has been entrepreneurial ventures within the Indian government, where the government came out with a government e-marketplace, like an Amazon. It was a government Amazon. And it has completely transformed the way that the government is procuring. In fact, there are talks that they will actually turn it into a private sector marketplace also. Similarly, a national agricultural marketplace, completely transformational for India. The unified payment systems, where it has suddenly become one of the largest payment platforms in the world, where more than 1.5 billion transactions happening on a monthly basis. And it connects everybody's account to everybody's account. And I can just press a button and make a payment. It's absolutely smooth, done by the patronage of the government, by creating small different organizations where entrepreneurs took it up and turned it into a very successful venture. And if you're talking about India, we must talk about cows. That's important. We actually had cows going online for sale. And this was done for the first time almost 20 years ago by somebody from IIT Kanpur, a gentleman named Amit Agarwal, who actually sold a cow on the net almost 20 years back. And those are entrepreneurial ventures that the government actually supported. And since we, quite a few of us are from IITs, and there's IIT2020, I must talk about the entrepreneurial ventures within the IITs. After 60 years of just ramming in engineering education, they're actually coming out with medical education. We all know the challenges of coming out with new institutional structures within an old archaic institutional structure. And that's what both IIT Kharagpur, IIT Kanpur, they've all been doing, and putting up super specialty hospitals, medical education, which is indeed quite awesome in that sense. I couldn't believe that IITs could do that. And that is really an excellent entrepreneurial venture that the IITs have done. Just coming to the end of my little conversation, I think the phases of entrepreneurship is well summarized by what Mahatma Gandhi said, is first they ignore you within the organization. And if you persist, then they laugh at you. If you still persist, then they fight you. And if you still persist at the end of it, then you win, and that's when they embrace you. So thank you, Rohit, for the opportunity, and thank you to IIT2020.
Thank you, Jaijit. That was so awesome. I loved your example of selling a cow on the internet. That's like really cool. So I had one question which came up on the chat room as well. So how do you view an entrepreneurship different in India versus US? Can you spend like a couple of minutes to talk about that?
Sure, Rohit. As I mentioned, US has this mantra of focusing on the core competency. So if you are a camera company, you should do nothing else but cameras. And that works because you can become the top dog in the camera industry in a stable economic environment. In India, if you focus on one single core activity, it is quite possible that the core activity may just vanish. We have entire business houses that vanish because of nationalization of aircraft manufacturing, of shipbuilding, of even airline services, and so on and so forth. So naturally, in India, it is easier to have entrepreneurial ventures which are not frowned upon, and you're not really threatening anyone because that's the nature of business. You need to have a diversified set of businesses within the Indian ecosystem so that you can survive. That may not be that much more acceptable in US, where if you are in a digital company, you can't go ahead and say, well, I'm now going to make vegetable oils because I can do it in a much cooler way. Well, that will not possibly be that easier to get accepted.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. So I'd like to remind everybody, if you want to ask the speakers any questions, please put it in the chat. I get the feed and I can ask them questions to make it interactive. Thank you, Dr. Jaijit. Now, Dr. Herman will talk about his experience in entrepreneurial ventures.
Thank you, Rohit, and thanks for the invitation to speak today. So when Rohit asked me to do this, I thought I don't really know much about what's called entrepreneurship. But I have worked in lots of different scales of organizations. So I thought I'd share some of my hopeful wisdom. Maybe that's arrogant to call it wisdom, but my experience within large companies trying to still remain innovative. And so I started my thought process about this on reflecting on one of the quotes of great innovators of the 20th century. And I'm not talking about Steve Jobs, I'm actually talking about Henry Ford, let's see, who said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, one of the disappointments of preparing something like this is the fact that when you look on the internet, you realize the truth. And the truth is probably that Henry Ford never actually said this quote. It probably was a case of somebody thinking a car was a faster horse and promoting that, and somebody misattributing that to Henry Ford in history. But it's a really interesting point of view. It kind of sticks, right? A car is fundamentally different than a faster horse. And I think this is what gets to the heart of innovation frequently. Henry Ford said this approximately in 1909. It took a number of years before, well, actually, given the conversation before, perhaps Gita said it in many centuries ago. But in 1997, Clayton Christensen had this very important book called The Innovator's Dilemma. And this is my statement of the innovator's dilemma, which is that successful companies listen to their biggest customers and optimize the products that they have to maximize, the satisfaction that those customers have and maximize their profits. And big customers, especially when it comes to businesses, previously want more, they simply want more of what they had previously. They want better, faster, smaller, cheaper. But the point of the innovator's dilemma is that this process, this process of maximizing profit can lead to missed opportunities, and thus the turnover that's happened frequently in our industry, in information technology. So entrepreneurship, of course, is an idea that where you create an entity within a large company, maybe that's sort of sheltered from the big customer requirements. My presentation here, and maybe this is me being a professor again, is to try and teach a little bit of what can make you successful, even if you don't have the luxury of being in one of these sheltered, innovative environments, a la the entrepreneurship. And I think a lot of what that comes down to is listening to customers correctly, listening to customers appropriately. So in order to tell my story, I have to give a little bit of background. I continue to work on these devices called field programmable gate arrays, which are really a weird hybrid between hardware and software. And for some customers, that trade-off, that hybridization is the best of both worlds. Customers who want the performance and determinism of hardware, and yet they want to be able to upgrade, for instance, their radio heads all over the world instantaneously without having to send technicians to the top of dangerous towers to swap boards in and out. But there are also a large number of customers who, for this hybrid is kind of an unhappy compromise, right? And an FPGA frequently is a case where a customer would love to build a fully customized device, but doesn't have that luxury and it's too expensive. So what do these customers complain about? What they generally complain about is that, first, I don't have the volume to justify a custom chip. Then they say, they don't want to pay for a feature that's built into the chip that they don't use. Have a request such as, why don't you build exactly what I want as I've defined it, and, forget the other customers who aren't using it. And the most audacious example I ever saw of this in my experience was customers who were asking us to incorporate features into a chip and then make sure that other competitors, their competitors, couldn't use it, right? So let's talk back about Henry Ford and what he would have said regarding this. He had a quote, and this one is actually documented, that he did say that any customer can have a car painted any color he wants, so long as it's black. Why did Henry Ford say this? If you read it, it's a very arrogant statement. The backstory about this is a little more, merciful to him. He was basically arguing that the salespeople who were asking for Model Ts of a different color didn't understand that the value proposition of the Model T car was that it was built so inexpensively because the manufacturing assembly line was so streamlined and didn't have any other complexity to it, and that doing something else would challenge that value proposition. So how does that relate to us today? 110 years later, I don't think we have the same problem, right? We don't get stuck on the idea of having a green car, for example. Manufacturing technologies are sophisticated enough that can be adapted to. But what we do have is the fact, especially in IT, hardware, and software, you have the essence of a clean product design, and then you have a swarm of customer requirements, and frequently they are square pegs into round holes. They just don't fit. And the choice that you're faced with is trying to incorporate those requirements into a clean product design in a way that will destroy the simplicity, the elegance of the design, to begin with. So my lesson here, in some respects, is that frequently these customer requirements come delivered as implementations. In other words, the customers are still asking for the faster horse. So my workaround, my solution to this problem is figuring out how to, I do wonder why customers do this, right? I think frequently I've dealt with engineers. Engineers express requirements as implementations. To some extent, maybe they just think about implementations more easily. But I think it's easier as well because they don't have to define this surface of indifference. They don't have to determine exactly what they care about and what they don't care about. And lastly, they're not paid to understand your product and your simplicity. So they're not going to necessarily be able to give you an implementation that makes sense overall in a holistic product sense. So what do you do with that if customers keep coming at you with faster horses? I think what you have to do is disassemble those faster horses. So the idea would be, delivered an implementation as a requirement. I think the work that is required is to disassemble those into sets of requirements. Those sets of requirements, some of them may be part of your interpretation, frequently there's only really a subset of them that need to be delivered in order to make the customer happy. So I think that's when, you know, kind of distillation of that and then customer review to figure out whether this was really their surface of indifference or not. And then conceiving a product, you know, product features that are consistent with the overall product definition, evaluating them against those requirements, seeing if those requirements can be satisfied. And if that's the case, then I think you've done the end run around the faster horses problem and avoided kind of over complexifying your product in order to satisfy your customer. Of course, you'll notice my flowchart only includes a yes there. When there's no, it's a much more difficult situation, and I don't really have a solution in that respect. I think that the question to really ask is that requirement fundamental? And make a hard decision as to whether you're going to disappoint your customer in favor of supporting product simplicity and clarity. This is really hard to win, and it's hard to quantify. And unfortunately, you don't have a really good solution for that. I think that's just a good common sense place. I think I'm on time.
All right. Thanks so much, Herman. Really appreciate this. So, you know, it's very interesting. You brought up this innovator's dilemma, and that's like a thing which every big company deals with. And that's actually a good segue for us to dive into entrepreneurship as a means to solve that. So can you expand that on a little bit? Like, how can a company, established company with billions of dollars in sale, avoid this innovator's dilemma?
Well, I do think that the idea of enabling your engineers, a la the Google 20% projects, is one way to do that, sort of informally. I mean, of course, beyond that, you do have to have some structure, some organizational structure to foster those things, to allow them to happen. And I think a lot of successful large organizations have that, right? They have a pipeline to turn their laboratory work into productization. They have places to insulate and sort of provide a little bit of a runway for projects to evolve into a product definition without immediately the tension of customer requirements and profit and loss.
I see. And one question came up on the chat. So I'm reading this. How, since you were at Google X, which is like the Google incubator, so how can entrepreneurs get disappointed at not receiving as much financial reward as their entrepreneurial brethren?
Yeah. So maybe this is just me mellowing with age, but I do think that that if you're becoming an entrepreneur to be a billionaire and not sort of put a ding on the industry's space, maybe that's not the right place, right? I personally, I mean, I hate to sound preachy, but that's, you know, I get my satisfaction out of having an influence and being the change. So.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Herman. So great talk. So next we have Julia, who will talk about some of her adventures in Medtronic. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? So the connection is good?
Yes.
Sounds good. So let me share my screen then. And I think my topic actually very nicely connects with the previous speaker. So I'll try to use a very particular example of the work that we've done at Medtronic, and I think it will nicely complement what was shared before. So let me see if you can see that. Okay. So yeah, thank you so much, Jaijit, for inviting me. As you mentioned, so I currently work for the company called Medtronic, right? So I'm with Medtronic for the last 8 years. My background is mostly in operations, supply chain management, but when I joined the company 8 years ago, I shifted more towards digital transformation and innovations. And I try to stay in that space ever since. So the story that I will be sharing today is the work that we've done with my team. We started that 4 years ago, and it was one of the like biggest success stories in our company in the space of channel management. And I think there is a lot of great learnings that will be hopefully nicely received by the audience. And I'll try to do my best to keep it concise and short as well, because I think we are a little bit maybe short on time, right? Anyway, so with Medtronic, I also had a chance to live and work in different countries. So previously, before the US, I was living in Europe. And so for that particular project or initiative, I was asked to relocate to the States, to our office in Minneapolis. And basically the goal, and it's a past story, right? So it's a kind of a story that happened in 2016 when basically with their, as their medical devices company, unfortunately had quite limited visibility on our distributors, right? Which are our channel partners. And in a lot of cases, as you probably know, we sell through our distributors, right? As products are being delivered to hospitals, right? Eventually. But the challenge was that we had limited visibility in terms of what's happening after we sell to distributors, right? And we didn't have a system or any way to track this information and to use this information for us to make sure that we can understand our customer needs and non-customer needs, right? The goal was to find to fund an initiative, right, that will help us to gain visibility into distributors' sales, right? And we had a target to basically double that number. And back then it was around 40%, and the goal was to make it to 80%. So the question was, how can we drive such a big initiative, global initiative, right? Because we have around 6,000 distributors globally, and whether we need to run it using our internal IT department, right, in partnership with them, or should we outsource it, right? So we had many different questions, and we also, quite honestly, didn't really know how it's going to all work out, right, and whether we have, I guess, the right resources, right, and whether this will be received by our customers. So because the solution was not only about an internal kind of startup, as I call it, right, but it was eventually, it needed eventually to be delivered to our customers, right, to our distributors. So the solution was, so the initiative was, we started in 2016, right? So we formed core team. We also made the decision to go internal. So that's why I think I kind of call it internal startup, right? Because we decided to work with our internal IT department, and we formed a global team. We had funding, but literally the goal was to build a solution, right, and make sure that we can deliver that product to customers, to our end customers. So my story, I think, so what I'd like to share today is basically lessons learned, right? And some of the insights that we were able to gain through that experience. But before even doing that, I think it's important maybe to bring some kind of historical perspective in terms of how things been working for us. So basically the starting point was to form a team and make sure that we can start collecting requirements from our customers. But very quickly we realized that we cannot fully rely on those requirements coming from our customers, right? Because sometimes we saw that some of them were not necessarily essential, right? Or some features, for example, product features will not work, I don't know, in one country versus another country, right? And we started to struggle with a really big demand of different type of requirements that were not really sometimes matching well. And on a global level, we really had to build a system that will work in all the countries, right? That will work in China, that will work in Russia, will work in Asia. So we started very quickly kind of understand that we had to kind of go beyond customer needs and requests that were coming our way, and provide I guess, strong leadership in terms of what, for example, will be part of that solution, what won't be. We formed a core team of experts. We asked every region, every big region, we have 4 regions at Medtronic, to assign, I guess, a representative who can provide us also a perspective on regional customer dynamics and certain things that we need to know about the environment. And we started to work with our internal IT department pretty much to drive requirements and to start building a pipeline and make sure that we can use agile methodology while doing that. And as you know, right, some big companies not always, I think, don't always have maybe good experience running agile for many different reasons, because I think we all dependent on funding, right? We all kind of a little bit restricted in terms of using resources, right, internally. So, but we really wanted to make sure that the solution that we're going to build will be also, of course, will be customer centric, right? Because eventually it has benefits that would be acceptable by the customers, right? Because we needed to build a system that would be leveraged by them in partnership with us, right? So, and then the approach that we've chosen, right? So since we've been using Agile, so we knew that we have to pilot the solution. We knew that we had to get feedback from one of the regions, right, in one of the countries. So we've done that, and it was received really well. So we had a small pilot, I think 6 months after we started the project from the kind of a requirements gathering perspective. We piloted that, we captured feedback. And then I think step by step, by doing pilots in every region, we started to learn what are those additional, I don't know, nuances or certain things that needs to be also considered by us. And eventually we were able to implement that solution to over 50 countries over 3 years. Eventually it was implemented, I think, to over, back then, right, because it's a little bit of a kind of a historical perspective that I'm giving today. So back then it was implemented to, I think, over 1,000 of distributors. And surprisingly, we realized that, quite honestly, requirements that we've been receiving, different requirements that we've been receiving from the regions, eventually we realized that a global solution can exist, right? So, and it's sometimes less about some requirements that sometimes can look very different. I think it's just a different business process that can exist, right? But you can still have one global solution that can work in everywhere pretty much, right? And we've been able to prove that, and we've been able to basically make sure that we as one company can use this one solution, one system that we have developed for all our channel partners around the world. So some of the more, I guess, specific, I guess, lessons learned that we captured, and the team also, maybe I'll give you kind of a perspective on the team size. So the program team was around 80 people globally, right? And the size of this project, right? So we ran that for 4 years, and we were able to implement it. I think today's number, as I heard, I think it's probably like 2,000 distributors, and I also know that the team eventually went live in China like a month ago. So the China team also went live as well. So some of the more specific, I guess, lessons learned from that implementation and from driving this startup inside of a big corporation, right? So certainly cross-functional collaboration, right? Making sure that we can allow different perspective, different kind of angles in terms of how this global final solution should look like, right? Ability to use a customer-centric type of development, right? So I think agile methodology is still a key while you're driving any type of innovations within a big corporation. Communication, of course, right? So make sure that you keep everyone informed and everyone understands sort of what's next, right? Bring this level of traceability, visibility, I think it's essential. We implemented global governance. we formed a team of subject matter experts from every region, right? And people been responsible to provide regional requirements and then played really well. We're able also to discover best practices, right? And establish those best practices from a global perspective, while again, kind of capturing knowledge and insights from every region. We've been able to put together a very nice cohesive playbook that eventually become our, I guess, intellectual property when it comes to driving innovations in that particular space within our company. The funding model, right? So I think we've been also trying to use resources from a global and regional perspective in a way that it's good for the company, right? So enterprise excellence is very important when the size of the company is big, right? And you should make sure you need to make sure that you are providing opportunities for all the regions participate in a very still kind of a complementary way. So we shifted from product to product, from program to product indeed, right? And we established this space, the area that became a very important, I think, space for the company, because previously, channel management and emerging markets, it wasn't a big really focus on that space. Yeah, I think those are the main insights. So this is some of the kind of teams that work together, right? So, but I think it's pretty much kind of talks. I already shared some of the insights in the previous slide about that, and the results. So basically, yeah. So we've been able to build this one-stop shop for all distributors around the world by driving this innovation in our company. We won a couple of awards, and I think it was one of the best success stories that I was able to drive, and I had I guess an honor and opportunity to do that for Medtronic. So yeah, I think.
Thank you, Julia. That's such.
If you have any type of comments or any questions to me, I'm happy to answer that, of course.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. This is great. This is a great success story. And actually, coming back to the question that we asked Herman about, like, what are the benefits you can gain from entrepreneurial ventures compared to the financial gains that an entrepreneur might get by building a startup. So this is a great example of what you were able to accomplish in terms of awards and recognition for yourself, as well as making an impact to the company, and as well as making a global impact, right? So thank you for sharing that story.
Sure, thank you.
So now let me switch over to Sumit, who will take over, and he'll wrap up the thoughts of all our panelists. And Sumit, please go ahead.
Thanks, Rohit. Tough act to follow. Really terrific set of presentations here. So I want to encourage all the listeners. We are watching the chat and, in fact, are eager to answer your questions. So please send your questions via the chat. Let me summarize. I mean, let me go in order with how everyone presented today. And, we got a really good perspective of what's happening in India and from Jaijit. And, it's interesting. I never even imagined or thought about the military as being entrepreneurial. But now when you talk about it, it makes sense. They in fact are extremely entrepreneurial. They've innovated quite a bit in any country. But the examples you gave specifically were great. And of course, the Indian ecosystem, you're right, Wipro, Reliance, Tata have continuously evolved and built new things, new businesses. Herman, you and I go back a long time, and I know about your entrepreneurial companies and startups. I used to be at a VC when Herman was pitching his startup. And so, I realize you've always been an entrepreneur. You left CMU to become one, in fact, to form your own companies. And I think, your perspective was really good, which is, this is a classic innovator's dilemma. Customer requirements never fit your clean product design. You have an idea, you have a strategy, and then kind of you like Mike Tyson said, right? You have a plan until you get punched in your face. And that's exactly what customer requirements are. You get punched in the face when you go talk to a customer about the product. And in fact, you gave the example of Ford. The one in my mind always is Nokia. The leader in cell phones pretty much overnight died, right? Because they just couldn't, even after iPhone came out, even after they saw the touchscreen revolution happening, they couldn't embrace it. And we're seeing this happen now with Tesla, electric cars, and so on. And Julia, I think, what you've done at Medtronic is amazing. I'll tell my story in a bit, but, kind of starting with thoughtfully thinking about how to set up a new idea and a startup inside a company for success, right? You sort of looked at it, okay, here are all the pitfalls, here's the organizational complexity. How do we, knowing all that, set ourselves up for success? And I think that, by the way, is also the theme of my message. So, I'll key off that. So again, please ask us questions, send your questions on chat. We are monitoring it. My name is Sumit Gupta. Let me actually start with who I am and why I'm qualified to perhaps give this presentation. I've done 2 startups in 2 companies. I built the NVIDIA GPU business, the AI accelerator business at NVIDIA, and I built a deep learning set of products, a product based on deep learning, I should say, at IBM, which are now successfully in the market. So I've done 2 startups, one in a small size public company, which is NVIDIA, and one in a company like IBM, which is 350,000 people. So some experience there. So before I start, I want to ask you all a question. This group, I'm sure the audience here is very entrepreneurial. Many of you probably work for big companies. What are your challenges? What are you running into? How can we, this team actually help you answer some of those things? So put in your challenges into the chat, and we'll answer as we go along. So I have a very simple presentation. I only have 2 or 3 slides, and this is the key one. I think the 3 ingredients for being an entrepreneur or being entrepreneurial is actually people, then ideas, and then market permission. So let me talk about all 3 of them. Just like if you talk to any VC, the VC will tell you that the number 1 thing they look at is the founding team. And this is the biggest issue even in big companies, right? Over time, people in a company, the culture, the people become they take less risk. Risk-taking becomes, you're not often rewarded for risk-taking. So, sometimes entrepreneurial people leave large companies. And then the flip side happens. The ones who stay actually end up being promoted or being successful. So somebody asked, what are the rewards for entrepreneurs within large companies? Actually, most entrepreneurs in large companies are the ones who end up being the leaders in the company, because they typically are doing not big new ideas, but they're doing many small ideas, and they're seen as the movers and shakers. And you'll see that the whether it's the fellow or the sort of the technical path, or the VPs of engineering or other product management, or the general managers are typically those people who otherwise would have been entrepreneurs outside the company. So the key thing is actually organizing your company in a way such that people who have that entrepreneurial spirit have a way to congregate, to meet other people like that. And then you do the ideation. And the ideation actually, in my opinion, is less important. I know that's a very controversial perspective, perhaps. But there's lots of ideas out there. Frankly, if you're a large company, the simplest thing you can do is just look at the startups. A large company, if they get their act together in an area where there is a lot of early stage startups, can really quickly out innovate them and out execute them because of the size of the company, because of the channels, existing distribution, all the things that actually Julia talked about, right? If you know how to leverage that, you can actually be super successful. You just need the corporate, I would say, culture and discipline to do it. But then the third thing that's very important is market permission. What I mean by that is, so I work at IBM. We have amazing speech and NLP, natural language processing technology. But it doesn't make sense for us to go create a product like Google Home or Alexa or something where it's a consumer facing product. We're not, we have small consumer businesses, but our key presence is in enterprises. So for us the better thing is to take those technologies and build out things for enterprises, whether it's document discovery, document analysis, customer care. And that's where we are sort of innovating. So that's about market permission, right? Where companies have the permission to operate naturally. So let me pause here. Let's see if the questions came in. I'd asked, what are the challenges you face as entrepreneurs? I see one question here.
Actually, Sumit, this could be a better question for Jaijit. We can ask him because it's India related.
Sure.
So Jaijit, you want to take it? You want to take this question? Jaijit, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm saying, let me just read out the question. It says, can environment be factored into intra by big companies, especially India in clean air, water, land, and the West in greenhouse gas reduction technologies are here, but rely on regulations that lag? Well, interestingly, Ajay, that's a question from Ajay Mukherjee. India is actually the only country which adhered to the norms that were laid out as part of the Paris Convention for reducing greenhouse gas reduction. And therefore, there are some good things possibly happening in India, because the outcome of that was that we could reduce the greenhouse gas emission from India. And India was only G20 country to be able to do that. I don't think we can have a segmentation by the kind of technology that goes in. And I think both the West and India should actually be working on things that matter to humanity and to people. And I think that's what the purpose of impact is. An impact cuts across regions, it cuts across the creed, people, everything. So I don't think we should be segmenting in terms of the kind of technology we are talking about.
So let me also answer it in the sort of the context of the slide I have. This also comes to market permission. So again, right, if you want to deal as a company, build out a new product or new set of things that help in clean air or other greenhouse reduction type ideas, it depends. Does your company have market permission to operate in that space? Right now, another question came in that Mark Anderson says that market matters the most. This is from James Paul. Thoughts on why you put market permission as the third one instead of the first? So I think, the reason for this is, I firmly believe, and I forget which book I read this in, it was Good to Great, I think, or one of them, which was the book talked about, the author talked about, first, you got to get the right people on the bus. And then you got to figure out where you take the bus. And so teams, people are critical. So I'll give you, an idea, right? So I'm leading AI strategy and I'm also the CTO for data and AI at IBM. I have created a set of workshops. We've come up with great ideas, amazing ideas for what we can do with AI. And now we're frankly trying to figure out, hey, how do we assemble a set of people who can take these ideas and develop them, develop the idea around, to your point, is there a market? Is there how do we do product market fit? And do we have market permission? In other words, if we build it, what market permission means is also kind of what Julia talked about. Do I have the right distribution channel? Can I access that customer? Do I have an existing product that I can piggyback on that would give me the 10x leverage in that market? So I can go operate as IBM in particular, right? We are so, we have the scale and the investment opportunity that we could go build anything we wanted to in technology. But does it make sense? And it's also about ROI, right? Between a set of different ideas, where would we want to invest? Let me continue with my presentation and then we'll come back. Please keep asking your questions in the background. So let me highlight a few of the challenges I've seen building new products. And in fact, this reflects on the presentations that my colleagues gave too. Innovator's dilemma is clearly the biggest issue. The experts on a certain area are in the company that leads that area, right? Nokia, they were the experts on cell phones, but they couldn't innovate because it would mean killing their own cell phones, right? And same thing, car companies, right? Why aren't car companies able to do over-the-air updates? Because it fundamentally disrupts a lot of the things that they do, which is they want to sell a new car rather than update the existing cars. So innovator's dilemma is a challenge. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, the people who are actually entrepreneurial in large companies end up being the successful ones in the large companies. I'm not saying you have to be entrepreneurial to be successful, but the ones who are entrepreneurial, the go-getters typically end up being in busy full-time jobs. And in some sense, they're doing a lot of entrepreneurial stuff in the job they're doing, right? Because every minute that we are running a business, we are doing micro adjustments, we're doing product market fit, we are creating new features, we're doing something. So, I think we're all tainted by this idea that you have to start with something completely new. It has to be a brand new startup to show that you're entrepreneurial. In fact, the successful business managers, the successful engineering leader, the successful technical person is constantly innovating, constantly doing improving the products or creating new small adjacent products. But the other challenge is most companies do not have a formal process, formal method to actually give new ideas a lease of life. Julia actually laid out an amazing methodology that they've built at Medtronic, but that's exactly what's missing in most companies. Let's say I have a new idea. How do I take that new idea, find a set of people that I can develop that idea, get, by the way, funding for all of us. In other words, we don't do our full-time job, but we go do that idea. Then able to, sort of go through an internal VC style process of getting funding and so on. And this is pretty hard to do. Then you run into the biggest challenge. And again, Juliet, that's why I said your presentation was so aligned with what I wanted to talk about. I built a product at IBM, and the biggest issue is when you work with a company whose revenue is $80 billion, and your product is making $1 million now, and you started from zero, you got to $1 million. In startup world, you'd be super, celebrated because I was able to do it very quickly within a few months. But in a big company with 80 billion, 1 million is nothing. You can't get the salespeople to pay attention because they have $20 million quotas, right? Or something like that. So in the end, it comes down to actually creating the, I would say, company permission, right? I didn't talk about that in the last slide, but the company needs to have a methodology where you can address all of these things. You need to, in fact, take your best people and constantly tell them what could kill us, what could, kill the product we build and build something new. What are the startups doing? What is, look at the startups, look at the big companies that challenge you. And that really is taking a bunch of entrepreneurial people, pulling them out of their busy jobs and making them be the innovators to fight the innovator's dilemma. But then you need that formal process. If the ideas that they come up with are good, or you need a way to evaluate those ideas and progress those ideas. And then you have to create, just like a startup would hire a sales team, you either enable this team to create new salespeople or incentivize your existing sales team to sell these new products in a way that they have a disproportionate compensation for selling new products versus selling old products. By the way, we are doing a bunch of these things within IBM. I can't talk very freely about it, but that has been part of the reinvention of IBM as well, especially with our new CEO, new management team. So folks, we are eager to hear your questions and chat. I have one more for you, which is how could we help you, this team that's on the phone, answer questions that could help accelerate your entrepreneurship journey. If you're an entrepreneur or a wannabe entrepreneur, what are the questions you have? What are you challenges you're running into? Please ask us, we'll answer. I see a few questions that came in. Let me quickly read them and answer. Uday Parekh asks, hey Sumit, can you share any examples of IBM deploying AI in chemical and refining processes? Uday, we've actually been working in the oil and gas industry quite a bit. I don't know if we've done anything in actually the refining process. We've done a lot in everything from kind of factory inspection to pipeline inspection to seismic imaging for oil and gas to look for deposits. But I don't know if we've done anything around refining it itself. I'm sure we have, I just don't know about it. Harsh Varma asks, what are the key factors for holding the ideas and access to the market for a 5-year plan? I'll answer, but then Julia, maybe you have a perspective on this too. I think this is the part of my point on the process and company permission or corporate permission. The corporate permission cannot be that a new business has to pay back in 12 to 18 months. It has to be a 5-year plan or so, because that's how startups are. Most startups right now, successful startups, take 7 to 10 years to be successful, right? If you look at most of the IPOs that are happening right now, most of those companies are at least 10 years old before they got to IPO. And so, companies who want to do internal startups or foster entrepreneurship have to have that long-term horizon too.
Yeah.
Julia?
Yeah, I think also maybe what I can add, ability to effectively communicate and also share that understanding of that it's going to take time and effort, right? And I mean, your ROI, you cannot see that immediately, right? I think ability to put it in the perspective, right? Effectively communicate it and also share this with your leadership, because believe it or not, but it's not always the case that people are on the same page when it comes to driving innovations within big corporations, right? So for us, it took us at least, I think, 3 years, but 3 years even to have a product, right? And have implement the product and have customer point of views, right? In terms of how it works and all of that. But I actually joined, I left that space last year. I joined another team. But the good news is that the team has continued driving that space. And what I was sharing during my presentation, that a month ago, eventually they went live in China, and China is one of the biggest regions. So, and the initiative started in 2016. So certainly, as you can see, it takes time, and I think it worth the effort as long as you are able to also kind of put together a story in a way that people understand that it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, and the rewards will come, but you have to be patient a little bit as well.
So we have time for one last question. Maybe I can ask Dr. Jaijit this. So if your company doesn't have an entrepreneurial effort, how do you convince the management to devote money and resources to make that happen?
No, that is the whole challenge of entrepreneurship. If you're not adding value, then you will not get support from either within the company or from outside. So if you were a regular startup and you did not really add value anywhere, you will not be getting the support that you're looking for. And that holds true in an entrepreneurial venture also. If you're not adding value to either the corporation or to the people or to the market space, then clearly it'll be a challenge trying to get that support. I think Sumit articulated that very well in terms of the the market permissions and the corporate permissions, and what the entrepreneurial venture needs to be is to be aligned to the market permissions and the corporate permissions, Rohit.
Okay.
And
well,
my experience on this, Rohit, has been that if you can get to senior management in a company, they are actually looking for entrepreneurial ideas. So I know that's hard if you're a junior person in the company to be able to access that. But most senior leadership is actually very interested in encouraging this. And so, frankly, it's a little bit of luck, a little bit of, it's like any, if you're like
persistence. It takes persistence.
Like so if you're a startup, you have to fight hard to get to the right VCs. It's the same thing.
And actually, Julia and I both try to get or have been formally trained as part of this lead corporate innovation at Stanford Business School for a couple of years as to how to actually set up a process and how to get buy-in from management on this. So anyway, so thanks so much. I know we're we're out of time. I really appreciate the speakers. They put in a lot of effort to put together slides and participate in Q&A. And feel free to connect with each and every one of us after this session. If you need any more insights or advice as to how each of us took the step in this space, we'll be thrilled to share that with you. A big round of applause to the speakers, and thank you for the good questions that came over the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.